Moonlighter is a two-part game. You'll play an adventurer and a merchant, delving into a dungeon crawling experience to slay monsters and grab some loot, eventually returning to sell that loot in your shop, which in turn allows you to purchase upgrades for both aspects of your life. A sound premise encapsulated within a gorgeous pixel art style. Get out of there! You're gonna die! Yeah, I can't separate those two, can I? So now the gameplay loop is simple. You enter a dungeon, you kill some monsters, grab some loot, you sell some loot, you upgrade your equipment, which allows you to go deeper into dungeons and progress further in the game. Now the progression in this game is linear. There are 4 dungeons in total and a final boss at the 5th door at the end of the game, which must be completed in a specific order. Each dungeon consists of 3 randomly generated floors and a boss. You can go back to any previously completed dungeon, but there's no real incentive to do so, as the next dungeon will usually contain loot of greater value. If you die within a dungeon, then most of your loot is lost, but you can exit a dungeon with your haul at any time, which means you've got to know when to keep going and when to stop. And I've had my fair share of let me just see what this boss does, oh crap I'm dead scenarios. Can't see what's going on. Oh. And so although the plan is not to die, you should always prioritise the important items at the top of your inventory in the eventuality that you do die, as you will get to keep those few. Now returning back to town can be done in 3 ways. You can defeat the boss, you can open a portal for a small fee, or you can spend a large amount of money to open a portal which lets you return back to the dungeon where you left off. Now the dungeons are not particularly long and they're not particularly difficult, so using the expensive portal didn't seem necessary most of the time. Although it does let you safely attempt a boss at full health with no risk, because you can deposit all your items before you go back. Usually, however, just being well prepared with potions before you go in is enough to get you through after you've had a couple of excursions to see what the enemies actually do. Now, combat in this game is slow paced. It favours a 3-hit combo chain. You have an extremely enjoyable and invincible dodge roll that feels great movement wise, but your attack animations have a sluggish weight to them, so it's not really always easy to dodge immediately when you want to. You have a basic 3-hit attack chain and a special attack. This felt adequate. It's more than likely you'll be using the same moveset for the entire game, however, and it doesn't evolve much. You also can attack through walls in this game, something the enemies can't do. So it feels natural to take advantage of this, and you'll align yourself up behind a wall and wail on an enemy until it's dead, which is a legitimate strategy against some enemies. There are 5 weapons in the game, and they do change how you play. A sword and shield, a 2-handed sword, a spear or trident, gloves, and a bow. Each weapon type has a different style to them, and you can swap between 2 weapons while dungeoneering. Each weapon has 2 linear upgrade paths, the first favouring raw damage, and the other opting for added elemental damage or status ailments. I chose to experiment with the latter, but didn't find it indicated it was much better than the standard really. In fact, it felt odd that the only upgrade choice I had was a fire sword while I'm in a fire zone fighting fire-based enemies, and likewise while I'm in an electric zone the only choice I had was to upgrade my weapon to electric damage. But as far as I saw, there wasn't a resistance or weakness aspect, and I felt more powerful just for simply upgrading it when I could. Armor can also be upgraded, and it's recommended you do so, but this just upgrades your stats of your character, it doesn't change the way they look. Now meeting new enemies is exciting, but most of them are one-dimensional with attack patterns that you'll quickly find out, and many of the later dungeons have enemies which don't move or remain stationary for a long period of time, which results in sitting there performing a 3-hit combo on them repeatedly until they're dead. However, it's bosses that hold the limelight here. They have an interesting moveset and hold particular challenge. Though some of the difficulty is here and there, some of the smaller enemies in the first couple of dungeons are harder than some of the later enemies, I would say. And I would say the boss of the second dungeon is one of the hardest ones, although they were all enjoyable to meet and fight. I'm just tingling his balls. Yeah, I know. Finally, whilst inside a dungeon, there is an enraged timer, for a lack of a better phrase. What's that? What's that timer down the bottom? Ah! This will spawn a large, ghostly enemy that follows you slowly throughout the rest of the whole dungeon, and this can kill you in one hit, and this will appear if you took too long exploring or fighting enemies. While I love the idea and the implementation, it feels like the game is punishing you for its own slow-paced combat. This timer does not seem to continue whilst you're looking in your inventory, which is a good thing because you're going to be spending a lot of time in your inventory. The inventory management is an engaging take on its kind. You've got limited slots and enemies drop loot, similar items can be stacked up to a cap, you know, the usual stuff. You also have a slot which can destroy any items, and you'll earn some money from this, but not as much as if you were selling it in your shop. Which is nice because then you don't feel like you've left a lot of loot behind, and it allows you to make space for other more important items in your inventory. However, the most interesting aspect comes in the form of curses which loot can have. There's a variety of curses, some of them are good and some of them bad, such as an item must be placed on the side of your inventory, at the top or the bottom of your inventory, others destroy item in a given direction when you return home, or duplicate itself onto an item in a given direction. Some curses can remove other curses. This all amounts to item position being quite important, so you've got a nice bit of management you've got to do there. If a curse will destroy an item on the right, then place the item in the rightmost slot so it's got nothing to destroy. You can also duplicate an expensive item onto a large stack of rubbish cheap items for loads of profit. Due to management being important, you'll be positioning a lot of items around to make sure your inventory is optimal, and this can be quite a chore. Now, I was playing on a gamepad, and you have to move one square at a time, and it can be very laborious. Swapping items also doesn't switch out the item for the item in your hand, but instead switches the items, which just causes a lot more movement that you have to do to get the items where you want to be. Overall, it's a really nice mechanic, which just needs a few quality of life tweaks, I think. Eventually, you have a big haul of items ready to sell in your shop. Currently, you don't know what they're worth though. You'll have to put it up for sale in your shop, estimate a price, and customers will show their happiness based on emote bubbles. This will give you an indication of whether you undersold the item or whether it's priced too highly, and then you have to adjust your prices for maximum profit. Now, personally speaking, I was not a fan of this guessing the pricing sort of portion of the game. I felt like it slowed the game down a lot. It requires arduous menuing to set the prices and constantly change them when people don't buy your items. So I understand why they did it, and it is worth doing because after you've sold an item, you'll know roughly how much it's worth in the future. This will come in handy when you're in a dungeon and you're deciding which item to scrap because you'll know their rough values. And also, not to mention, once you have a price, it'll auto set the price when you put another subsequent item up for sale. There's also a supply and demand mechanic where high demand items can be sold for a little bit more, but I never really felt that really was that important. Selling items in your shop starts quite slow at the beginning of the game, but it does pick up speed when your shop gets bigger and you've got more items to sell and they don't need estimating, where you can just put them up for sale and then get going. The game also throws other cool ideas at you, like thieves that can attempt to rob items and bolt out the door unless you tackle them to the ground. I think this idea falls flat because thieves have about 1 or 2 different skins, and they actually announce that they're a thief when they enter the shop with an emote bubble, so I already know you're a thief. Now, they do some nice shifty movements looking back and forth and pacing around, but I already know it's a thief. So it would have been a lot better if the thief could be anyone and you have to look out for those shifty movements, and I think that's a real wasted opportunity there. Regarding upgrading your town and shop, it's very linear, unfortunately. You'll expand your shop and purchase limited upgrades, eventually you'll have them all. Purchasing staff was an exciting prospect for some, and while you do get an assistant after upgrading your shop, she's the only staff member you can get, and she simply sells the stuff for you while you go to bed and takes 30% profits. So it's kind of like an auto-play feature. The lack of shop management will disappoint some people. There is a day-night cycle which makes dungeons harder at night, and the shop can only be open in the morning, so it kind of forces you into that role of doing that. The game's town doesn't ever really feel alive either, like Stardew Valley or Harvest Moon. The NPCs are pretty much one-liners and there's a lack of movement. It doesn't feel like a bustling city at all. There is a story, but it never felt engaging to me except for the repeated warnings of an old man about venturing further, which I promptly ignored. There is a tutorial, but it's quite brief, and I'm actually very thankful for that. I think there's other games where the tutorial goes on way too long and explain a lot too much and it just gets really boring, but this kept it short and snappy, so I'm very thankful for that. Now, regarding the story in the 5th door, it does hold secrets, and while there is a big twist at the end of the game, it felt quite bizarre to me and kind of out of nowhere really, so it really didn't draw me into that. The music is superb. It nails the dungeon-esque feeling and it's a delight to listen to, really nice. The town is also relaxing and calm as well. The pixel art is stunning and the animations will be one of the first things you notice when you watch it. They really do bring the characters and the creatures to life. So finally, Moonlighter is a game that succeeds on its addictive gameplay loop. I came back time and time again to go deeper and deeper into a dungeon and onto the next dungeon. It was a pleasant experience, and while it could use some fine-tuning, I actually thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you again next time. Normally I found that the old granny spends a pension on pure acid, and that was from the forest area, pure acid, but it's not illegal in this particular country that I'm playing in to use pure acid for recreational use, and the granny spends her entire pension on it. And old man Burns down here, he normally spends his money on speed powder. You know, he needs the virility, but we haven't got any for sale this time, so he's buying, I don't know, a flux capacitor, and he'll manufacture something that'll impress his wife, and just buy the battery pure, because I'm making a mint sauce. Where's the mint sauce?